Well, Patengal Mukundan, how do these large ships get taken by people who are, you know, zipping around in either Zodiac boats or Boston whalers?
Well, quite easily, really. They operate from motherships, and the mothership waits until the target vessel is within range, and then it launches two or more small craft with armed people on board. As the small craft approach the target vessel, they fire on the bridge windows of the ship and on the accommodation block in an attempt to intimidate the crew to slow down or stop. And if the crew slows down, then the vessel will be boarded and hijacked. The ships that have got away are the ones which have increased their speed and navigated further away from the mothership. And when they do that, after about 30 to 40 minutes, as the pirates see their mothership, you know, a distant speck on the horizon, they give up the chase and return. And these vessels are the ones which have managed to escape from these pirates.
Jim Robbins, how hard is it then for ships to, you know, sort of understanding the tactics the pirates use, be prepared and be ready to respond in a way that counteracts their, you know, sort of looking for weak vessels?
I suppose in theory it wouldn't be that difficult if the ship's owners invested in the training for the crew to understand the threat, and invested perhaps in some weapons to let the crew fire back, although that can be very dangerous as well. In theory, these things could be dealt with, but it's also important to have patrols from various countries that are interested in this. In the Malacca Straits, for example, Indonesia and Singapore have had a great deal of success in deterring pirates through aggressive patrolling, so that can help too. But again, it comes into a question of, will you invest the resources to do this, have the expertise to do it, and so forth. I think the piracy phenomenon is controllable through various means, but it requires focusing on it and having both deterrence and also dissuasion, and then consequences for those pirates who actually take out ships or hold people hostage and so forth.
Now, on the consequences standpoint, there does seem to have been a very different set of approaches. You talked about how the French looked to send commandos in to capture pirates after the ransom had been paid on Le Ponant, this luxury yacht. And yet it's been reported that Britain, which was once a country that did the most to stamp out olden piracy, has now sent a word from the Foreign Office that pirates are not to be captured because captured pirates could claim asylum in Britain, or if they're turned over to authorities in Somalia, might be denied their human rights if they're punished with the death penalty in Somalia. Have countries figured out, you know, sort of how they're going to go after the pirates?
I think it's done on an ad hoc basis, as you indicate. I know that Germany is now looking at what they want to do about this. They're concerned about getting involved in being kind of a world police force, but at the same time they want to do their bit. The UN, as you mentioned, is looking at a resolution, a draft resolution is being circulated that will allow countries kind of the legal framework within which they can take action. But there will be peculiarities, like you noted, of you know, individual laws of states. And yes, piracy, recently Somalia did sentence some pirates to death for their activities. So all of these things come into play.
Charles Dragonet, how big a difference would this UN resolution make in making it clear what countries can and cannot do to stop piracy in the first instance or pursue pirates after the fact?
I think it'd be very important because it would, for the first time, provide a transnational standard, terms of reference. Everyone then would have to still enact their own legislation saying, pay attention to this and do it. But right now, there is no agreed international standard to which individual countries will hold their own forces accountable. But I think what James said is equally important. We're talking now about a little bit about prevention, but mostly about retaking a ship after it's been captured. Well, the point is, if individual countries had the will to force their owners and flag ships to provide minimum standards for prevention, which could increase the size of the crews. I would never argue for arming the crews. Most captains I know would not want their crews any more armed than they already are. But they would want everyone to have a job to do, know what that job was, and be drilled in responding. And unfortunately, that's left to individual companies right now, and many companies are operating very, very thin margins where they just don't have the opportunity to do this with crews that are overworked, already very tired. And it is always a case where we have to have the crews as the first line of defense. Frankly, most of them are out there very, very alone in the world right now.
Well, Patengan Mukundal, what's your sense of the room for crews to be better trained or better prepared?
Well, I think there are some things which can be done. For example, in the aviation industry, the crew are trained to deal with stressful situations, one of which is when people get violent on an aircraft. Now, there is very little training given to ship masters and officers on board ships on how to deal with a piracy incident. If one looks at the cases of injury to crew and death to crew, it's often the case that the crew have reacted naturally because their living space has been invaded by outsiders who are aggressive, and that improper, ill-advised action has resulted in a reaction from the pirates. I think training to the crew on how to calm things down and how to focus on the safety of the crew and the navigation of the vessel would go a long way in trying to prevent injury to the crew.